Hey, today we're going to talk about how Adolf Hitler's foreign policy would contribute to his role as a leader of the Nazi German state. Adolf Hitler's successful foreign policy moves from 1933 through 1939 and even into the start of World War II would bring increased support from the German population for his leadership. Overall, Hitler's foreign policy focused on three main areas. First, the overturning of the punishments of the Treaty of Versailles. Second, the acquisition of territory that was populated by ethnic and German-speaking people. And finally, acquiring Lebensraum, this living space that the German state could expand into in Eastern Europe. Starting with the Treaty of Versailles, Hitler's 1920s and 30s political campaigns and propaganda would largely be directed against the provisions of the Treaty of Versailles. His first move will come following the 1933 Geneva Disarmament Conference, where Adolf Hitler called on other European states to bring their militaries down to the level of Germany's military, that 100,000-man army that the Treaty of Versailles called for. This, of course, is going to be rejected by France and Britain and others, leading Germany to withdraw from the conference, withdraw from the League of Nations, and ultimately start in earnest a rearmament program for the German military. The Treaty of Versailles also called for the Saarland region to have its resources head over to France as reparations following World War I. And 15 years after that agreement, which would be 1935, a plebiscite or a vote of the people of the Saar to decide whether they want to be citizens of France or citizens of Germany. The treaty also called for a military occupation of the Rhineland region, the western part of Germany. And finally, it called for no political union or Anschluss with Austria. Now, following Germany's removal of itself from the League of Nations, Adolf Hitler would enter into some bilateral agreements with his neighbors. First, with Poland in January of 1934. Now, Poland was, for its part, concerned about the League of Nations appearing weak after Germany withdrew from it. And Germany's rearmament is giving Poland some concern. So they would enter into a 10-year non-aggression pact with Germany. For Germany, this is going to offer some security of Germany's eastern border. It's going to weaken France's Eastern European security allies. France and Poland and France and Czechoslovakia had agreements with each other. And it gave the appearance that Adolf Hitler is somebody that could be worked with, even though Adolf Hitler left the League of Nations. Now, Hitler, for his part, said privately that all his agreements with Poland are of a temporary significance. Adolf Hitler was very much an opportunist who took opportunities when they benefited him and would change course when that benefited him. That SAAR plebiscite will be held in January of 1935. It had been under control of France since 1919, and now the people of the SAAR could vote as to which nation they would want to be a part of. Pro-German propaganda poured into the region from the Nazi Party ahead of the vote, and in the end, 90% of the SAAR population voted for Germany. This proved to be a huge propaganda victory for the Nazis. Now, German rearmament had actually always been taking place. It was long violating the Treaty of Versailles with regard to its military restrictions. Not long after World War I, in fact, an agreement between Germany and the Soviet Union allowed the Germans to develop an air force, a Luftwaffe, illegally in the Soviet Union. But now Adolf Hitler feels justified to go public with Germany's rearmament, following Britain and France refusing themselves to disarm at the Geneva Disarmament Conference. Hitler wanted to grow his army to 500,000 men and then beyond. This is 5 times what the Treaty of Versailles had allowed. Britain and France issued a mild rebuke to this, but really no challenge. It is looking like the Treaty of Versailles is not going to be supported by the Allies. Hitler also revealed the existence of a new Luftwaffe, or Air Force, that featured 2,500 planes. As Germany was not being stopped with its rearmament, Adolf Hitler made a move to remilitarize the Rhineland, sending German troops into this demilitarized zone. Now, at this point, the world is distracted by what Benito Mussolini is doing in Africa with the Abyssinian crisis, so Hitler will take this opportunity to remilitarize the Rhineland. He justified his actions following the signing of a French and Soviet agreement of mutual assistance and his proclaimed fear of being encircled by enemies. There was no opposition from Western powers, and Hitler would claim that he has no territorial ambitions in Europe. This is really just a movement of German troops from one part of Germany into another part of Germany, and nobody in Britain and France was going to go to war over the Rhineland. While this is happening, Adolf Hitler is stepping into new diplomatic alignments, particularly with the nation of Italy in what is called the Rome-Berlin Axis in October of 1936. Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler will establish their areas of mutual interest and essentially have a military alliance going forward. Also in 1936, Germany and Italy will sign into what is called the Anti-Comintern Pact, which is going to unify their nations against the spread of international communism. Japan will later join into this agreement as well. This would provide those states with mutual defense should the Soviet Union offer an attack. From 1936 to 1939, there was a war in Spain, the Spanish Civil War, and both Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini will support Spanish fascists in this civil war. For Adolf Hitler, it becomes a chance to try out his new German Air Force, that Luftwaffe. Also, the German Navy, the Kriegsmarine, will take part in this fascist victory in the Spanish Civil War. Infamously, the Condor Legion of the German Luftwaffe would bomb targets in Spain, including Guernica, which would be immortalized in this painting by Pablo Picasso. The rationale for Germany was a friendly Spanish government would be a government that Germany could trade with, and it would offer Mediterranean sea bases for U-boats. It could also test the Luftwaffe out for the German military. Hitler's first move to create what he called a greater Germany of German-speaking people would come with the Anschluss of Austria. Anschluss is a German word that essentially means union, a political union with Austria. With support from Austrian Nazis who were agitating for this union with Germany, the Austrian Chancellor, Kurt von Schuschnigg, would call for a plebiscite, a vote of the Austrian people on this question of Anschluss. Hitler mobilized his army on the border of Austria and pushed propaganda through the Austrian Nazi Party through that state to try to influence that vote. Facing no international opposition, Germany would actually move that army into Austria in March 12th of 1938, not wanting a vote to happen that could go against an Anschluss with Germany. Following this invasion of Austria that was met with no military resistance from the Austrians or the British or the French, a plebiscite would be held in April of 1938, where over 99% of the vote supported the German Union. Now, of course, whenever you see 99% of a vote going one way or another, it is not a fair election, and Germany certainly got the results that they had scripted. Adolf Hitler would now turn his attention to his east and look towards the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia. Now, remember, Czechoslovakia was a new country created after World War I, and in the western part of Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland region, there were many Germans, over 3 million Germans that lived in the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia. Adolf Hitler would claim that those Germans in Czechoslovakia, who were a minority in that new state, were being mistreated, and they should be a part of Hitler's greater Germany. A meeting would be held in Munich in 1938 to negotiate the outcome of this Sudetenland crisis. Britain and France, through that meeting, would agree to let Adolf Hitler take the Sudetenland region while offering a promise to the rest of Czechoslovakia to protect that nation's sovereignty. Also at that Munich agreement, Britain and Germany would sign their own agreement called the Anglo-German Declaration, where British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and Adolf Hitler would agree that disputes between those nations would be worked out through consultation and not military conflict, leaving Neville Chamberlain to go back to London and wave the agreement in the air, proclaiming that they have achieved peace in our time. By March of 1939, though, Adolf Hitler would violate that Munich agreement by occupying the regions of Bohemia and Moravia, the present-day Czech Republic. Now Hitler has moved beyond what he could legitimately consider German lands with German people and is now acquiring that Lebensraum. Now, turning to Poland. Poland was a new state following the Treaty of Versailles that was carved out of lands that were formerly part of the German Empire and formerly part of the Russian Empire. But with that creation of Poland, a Polish corridor was created to give this new Polish state access to the Baltic Sea. And within that Polish corridor, the city of Gdańsk, or Danzig, was called an international free city. After the occupation of Czechoslovakia, Germany proposed that Danzig should be returned to the German state, and Poland, of course, refused. On March 30th, seeing a possible invasion of Poland in the future, Britain and France would offer a guarantee of security to this Polish nation, and Germany ended their non-aggression pact with Poland. On the 22nd of May of 1939, Germany and Italy, seeing that Britain and France were looking to support Poland, would sign a military defensive alliance called the Pact of Steel. And Adolf Hitler would enter into one more international agreement prior to the start of World War I. With his plans to invade Poland already made, Germany reached out to the Soviet Union and signed in August of 1939, literally 1 week before the start of World War II, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, or the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, that each country would remain neutral if a war came to Europe, neutral with each other if a war came to Europe. And in a secret agreement, the two nations would divide Northern and Eastern Europe into Soviet and German spheres. This would benefit Germany by allowing them to avoid the two-front war that cost them so much in World War I. It gave a clear path to taking the western part of Poland, and it could still give access to Soviet resources through trade that could continue with the Soviet Union. For the Soviet Union, this would allow the USSR to stay out of a wider European war and focus on a Japanese threat in the east, while gaining territory in to the west of the Soviet Union. And it offered hope that Germany and Western capitalist powers would weaken each other, thus leaving the Soviet Union stronger. On the 25th of August, Poland and Britain signed a full military defensive alliance with each other. Benito Mussolini at this point is not ready for war, and he tried to organize another meeting like the Munich conference to try to resolve this crisis. But Hitler was no longer willing to wait. On the 31st of August of 1939, Germany claimed that a radio station near the Polish border was attacked by Polish forces. These were actually German SS soldiers dressed as Polish soldiers with the murdered bodies of German prisoners and put in Polish uniforms and left behind. On September 1st, 1939, Germany, using this Polish attack as a pretext, invaded Poland with its military, and its Luftwaffe bombed Warsaw. World War II has begun. Now, the early years of this war, 1939 to 1942, went quite well for Germany with very few setbacks. And we'll talk about this in a later video focused on World War II. But Hitler's decisions in 1941 to violate the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact and invade the Soviet Union in June, and then to support their Japanese ally with a declaration of war on the United States in December of 1941, will stretch his armies thin and give him now the largest nation in the world to fight and the biggest economic power in the world to fight. The course of the war will turn against Germany by late 1942. Some in the German military would question Adolf Hitler's leadership after defeats of the German army started to take place through 43 and 44. Some officers took part in the July bomb plot of 1944 that we talked about in an earlier video. But Adolf Hitler, through Nazi propaganda, still enjoyed strong support from the German people up to the end of the war in 1945 and the defeat of the German military and the suicide of Adolf Hitler. So in the end, while foreign policy offered many successes to Adolf Hitler's regime and brought him a lot of public support, it was ultimately the foreign policy decisions of the Second World War to invade the Soviet Union and declare war on the United States that would bring an end to the authoritarian state of Nazi Germany. We'll see you next time.